Hello class, welcome to the spring semester. How's everybody doing? So I've given you a lot of information to consider before getting to this point in our structure, in our course structure, and I hope that it has presented you with some questions, some concerns, and points of broader interest with regard to the term that I'm using as our structural backbone, and that word is value. So I'm going to get back to the corner essay at the latter part of this little talk today, but I want to start off with just one quote from them where they say, and I don't really need to quote them on this, but I just kind of feel like doing it because I have the book right here. Each epoch defines art differently, demanding that values be explained historically. It's a simple quote, but it really does give a little bit of a light into what I am seeing currently as a contemporary problem in the discourse around the word value and the idea of value as it stands today. And the problem is really clearly defined in the untitled essay that I assigned for this week. That was in Contemporary Art, 1989 to present, and also in Jarrett Moran's TED Talk, which I hope all of you watched just before clicking on this video. The thing that I see as a problem is that contemporarily we as a society we have chosen one very specific way to lay value onto artwork. And that way is defined very clearly in this table, which is easily accessible on Wikipedia, and it is a listing of the most expensive paintings to be sold. And at the very top of that list, you can see that there was a canvas by Paul Cézanne that sold for $259 million. That sale went through in April of 2011, and it was sold to the state of Qatar. A little bit of background: the state of Qatar is the Sheikha Al-Thani. She is a very avid collector of art, but she's doing it for the state. This is a very wealthy state. They made a lot of money not only because of oil reserves, but they actually made a lot of money on pearls, the pearl industry, like the necklaces and that kind of stuff. And she, with this veritable coffer, unlimited amount of money, she is going around the world buying works of art that she is bringing into the state to help legitimize the art practice and also the cultural cachet of the burgeoning Middle Eastern nation. So that's the story behind why that price was so high. But I just wanted you to know that. The reason why I bring up all of this is because that's one way of looking at value. There's plenty other ways. We today, in an era that is defined by the 99%, but also the 1%, it's defined by how many individuals own the maximum amount of wealth. All of these little factoids and tidbits that are floating around social media, but also mainstream news agencies. And the reason I see that as a problem is because it's giving us a really myopic view of the possibility for other kinds of value to be applied, but also to be taken out of artistic practice. I'm sure that all of you would love to make millions and millions and millions of dollars doing what you love to do. Isn't that the dream? We all want to do that. I mean, I would love to have millions and millions and millions of dollars. Instead, I'm lecturing to you in a nonprofit gallery space in New York City, and it's really cold. That's why I'm wearing this hat. So it's not really cold. That was a little hyperbolic, but there's all of these different ways that we can take cultural traditions and cultural meaning out of out of works of art. And I'm seeing this very sad tradition where all people want to discuss is the monetary worth of something. In other words, they're taking a work of art, a work of art that it has a very long timeline, a very long lifeline, and they're picking one moment out of it. And they're saying that this moment, that moment which is defined as the commodity phase, that moment is the single most important moment of the entire life of that work. And that entire life is therefore completely ripped away, and we look now, when we see Paul Cézanne's The Card Players, the only thing that we can think about, obviously right now because it's right in front of you, is $259 million. $259 million. That's a lot of money, right? But let's scroll down this list, and we land on Vincent van Gogh's 1890 portrait of Dr. Gachet. This work, as you can see in the column on the side of your computer monitor, sold for that amount of money. But when Vincent van Gogh made that work, he was making a painting of someone that was a confidant, someone that was an overseer, someone that was, for lack of a better word, his steward. Dr. Gachet oversaw the clinic that, not the clinic's a term that we use, the hospital that Vincent was staying at. When he was living, I believe this happened in Arles, I could be wrong in the specific town, but he is in the care of Dr. Gachet. And so he made a painting of a man who was very dear to him. And he imbued this painting with all of the freneticism of brushwork, all of the staccato and activity of that's so signature to how Van Gogh made his paintings. And then he took that painting and I'm almost 100% that he then immediately sold it to his brother. And I say sell because at this point in their relationship, that was the word that they were using. Because in conversation with his brother Theo, Vincent constantly changed the rhetoric around which he accepted money from his brother. Basically, his brother gave him a living stipend, but occasionally Vincent would send him paintings and claim that he was actually that he was selling these works, that he wasn't actually just taking money from his brother. His brother wasn't selling those works subsequently. As everyone knows, as is common knowledge with Vincent van Gogh, he sold one work during the course of his lifetime. All of his works were sold posthumously, this work included. So this work actually didn't enter into a traditional commodity phase until well after its producer had passed. Yet, one of the major reasons why this work is historically regarded in our day and age is because it fetched that amount of money on May 15th, 1990. Yes, the art market is huge. That's what Jarrett Moran's conversation was about. But the problem with looking at or thinking about the art market as being that massive, and then only discussing the very, very top echelon of collectors and dealers and galleries and blah, 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 is that you limit an understanding of the actual breadth of the art market. The art market is vast. You can buy works of art for as little as, I don't know, probably a case of beer. You could buy them for as much as $259 million. But in between, now granted that, like, economically speaking, and when you look at the numbers, $259 million is a huge portion of the art market, right? Because it's so much money. It's such a big sum. But if you actually look at another quantifiable number, which is so hard to get a handle on, the actual amount of works that pass through this commodity phase. I know I'm kind of getting a little tedious here, but if you look at the amount of works that pass through the commodity phase, it's not just at $259 million. It happens on First Friday on Congress Street in downtown Portland when a young MECA student sells a print or a bracelet or a tiny vitrine for $15. That's the art market. That's a commodity phase. That's a work of art that passed from the producer to a consumer, right? Granted, Paul Cézanne didn't sell this directly to Sheikha Al-Thani, but he did sell it or consign it to his gallery, which then subsequently sold it. So he was in charge of it when it passed into that commodity phase. But he was also in charge of it before it hit that commodity phase. And after it had passed through that commodity phase, it has been put on public exhibition, it has been cataloged, it has been often photographed, it has been historicized, and all manner of different value systems have been applied to that work of art in between the time that it left Cézanne's studio and entered into the collection of the state of Qatar. In that time, it probably passed through the commodity phase a few times. It passed through a few different collectors' hands, right? That's what happens to things. Think about a car. You probably all purchased a used car. That car had an initial commodity phase when it left a dealership and drove home with some young family or rich doctor or whatever. And then after years of use, after years of valuable use, it was then put back into the commodity sphere and was then sold to another owner. Now, art's a little different. Art generally appreciates in value. Well, I take that back. Art does not generally appreciate in value. A very small portion of artwork appreciates in value. The majority of artwork, economically speaking, does not necessarily appreciate in value, but it appreciates in historical value. So, here it is. In the last 12 minutes, I probably said the word value with about 30 different adjectives before it, and I probably used that word about 100 times. Okay, maybe not, but, I like hyperbole. It's fun. All of this is to say, 12 minutes into our semester, I've already confused the hell out of you. I'm talking about a commodity phase. I'm making all these weird associations and telling all these random narratives about the lives of Paul Cézanne and Vincent van Gogh and Sheikha Al-Thani. What the is this guy talking about? I'm talking about the way that we look at the things that surround us. Not everything is assigned a dollar amount. Oftentimes, we don't consider the dollar amount. And what I want to do over the course of our term together is look at a variety of different ways that we can observe contemporary art practice that fall under the heading of value or valuable, but that aren't necessarily looking at the monetary worth of the thing when it is in this very short-lived period of its long life, the commodity phase. And we're going to do that by actually very slowly going through the structure of the art market, and I'm doing this specifically to clear the air, and then we're going to look at some critical discourse. But first, I do want to go through the coroner's article very briefly with all of you and highlight some things that I think are important, and bring up some names and do all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to pause, realign this viewfinder, and then we're going to get back into it. Hang tight. Alright, so the corner article is, I think, instrumental in understanding the fashion in which we are going to be going through our course material. Now, I say that meaning that it's going to be a good introduction. It is certainly not going to cover the breadth of what we are going to be talking about, or rather the other way around. We are not going to be going through, we're not going to be doing as much of a historical survey as the coroners do in this text. Now this text comes from this book, critical terms for art history. It's been on my bookshelf for about 12 years, and which is crazy. Not that, whatever. There's historical value in it, you know. So you might, while going through this scanned copy that is actually out of my book, you might have seen that there are a few different notation systems in there. One was when I was a freshman in college. The other happened 6 months ago when I started outlining this course. The other happened fairly recently when I was trying to figure out what I was going to say to you tonight, today, whatever time of the day it is for you. So the corners do a very, very thorough job of breaking down the word value. And they do it by looking at the different ways that history has shaped that term. And the reason I enjoy this as an introduction is because we are really going to be focusing on the postmodern period, or the term that historians refer to as the postmodern period. And so this text gets us up to that, or near to it. And so it's a little bit of a background, but it's also a good way of understanding the way that art historians have approached the term value, even when they're dealing with contemporary art practice or art practice from 1989 to the present, generally the postmodern period. For me, I want to start off a few pages deep on page 296, or the third page in your reading, where at the very bottom of the page, they very quickly run through, it's in just a few lines. The Middle Ages valued precious materials. The Renaissance began to champion craftsmanship. That's true. And the modern period, craftsmanship became eclipsed by the value of artistic genius. Genius is something we've talked about before. Craftsmanship is not something that we've really dealt with, other than a little bit of our conversation during last semester when we dealt with the idea of the de-schooled. But we certainly haven't dealt that much with precious materials. And the good thing about having an understanding of the historical definitions of value specific to art history is that books like this inform people like me who teach artists like you. And so since this book has been around for quite some time, and this book is a representation of the beginnings of postmodern discourse in art history, but specifically in art historiography, we have here a really nice understanding of the way that contemporary artists, postmodern artists, who have the full breadth of history to mine through, the way that they pick and choose what they want, And we've talked about this with appropriation, we've talked about this in a few different iterations, and I know Peter has talked about this some with you as well. So, it's not odd that an artist would make the very conscious decision to use a precious material to convey a certain meaning, even though the corners say that that's a tradition that goes back to the Middle Ages and faded out during the Renaissance. Artists today still understand that there is historical merit in using precious materials. Certain artists today, privilege, like they did in the Renaissance, craftsmanship, and subsequently certain artists privilege genius. And so, if I'm listing the biggest names that I can possibly think of to list right now, I would say that Marina Abramovich privileges genius, Jeff Koons privileges craftsmanship, and I would say that Peter Doig privileges precious materials. That's a pretty good list. I mean, he mixes his oil, his painting pigment with lavender oil, and he makes massive canvases, these huge canvases that are made of this incredibly precious lavender oil. It works well. He's a wonderful painter, and he's very good at what he does. But that is really specific to just art practice. The other thing that I find interesting about this text is the way that I often do if Lisbeth's name was first, I would probably credit this entire authorship very casually and very erroneously to female pronouns, when really I need to be crediting both of them. They. We have two authors, one male, one female. I need to do my due diligence and say they, right? They do a really fantastic job of highlighting also historians or cultural critics or economic theorists that have dealt with value in different ways. And so on the next page, not on the next page for you, but on the next page for me, 297, down at the very bottom, right where I put in the side, it takes the future to define the present. Thank you, 18-year-old Christopher. Words of wisdom. But 18-year-old Christopher did know that if somebody references Hegel, go ahead and highlight it. You might want to know where the Hegel quote is in this thing. So, Hegel said, art itself, considered in its highest vocation, is and remains for us a thing of the past. Art's value is constructed nostalgically. Now, Hegel was a historian, and a lot of the ways that Hegel approached history was in a cyclical fashion. And so he was very aware of not only what history was, as in how the past was different from the present, is different from the future, but he was very aware of the way that information, and specifically the value of certain information, changes over that time period. It might swing all the way back around, as is the case with certain geographic regions. You see a neighborhood that is built for very affluent people, and then it goes into an economic decline, and then it swings back around and becomes very valuable again once a new civilization, a new society privileges older buildings as opposed to newer bourgeois buildings. To give you an entirely bizarre example. So he brings in Hegel. He's a pretty good guy to bring in. On the next page, we deal with Walter Benjamin, who is a favorite of the postmodern theorists. And Walter Benjamin deals with, quote, the ability to see through the aesthetic value of the present thus seems to engender an idealization of a vanquished past. So he's kind of criticizing Hegel's perspective. Excuse me. We're on this page now. Those underlined things. But then I definitely did circle those things fairly recently, right before scanning them. Age value and historical value. I circled those specifically because I think you can put any word in front of value and all of a sudden you have a completely different understanding of that word. If I was to say that something is historical to you, okay, it's old. But if it has historical value, that changes that. It changes both the adjective or adverb, because value can be both noun or verb. But it also changes the term value. And there are so many different combinations that you can go through that it's almost infinite. Radical value. That which is valuable to radicalism. Religious value. That which is valuable to the religious. Secular value, to swing the pendulum back. Conservative value, to swing the pendulum from radicalism all the way over here. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can imbue the term value with a sense of meaning. It's lost. And so, I belabor this point to really go back to that first thesis that I put out there, that we today, when we say the word value in its relationship to art practice, we always default to the most expected and kind of derivative conversation, which is monetary equivalence. The thing that I love the most in my collection of artworks that I actually purchased from artists, I paid so little money for it. So little money for it. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Crazy. But, so, to continue on with the corner thing, I gave you two little circles over here in the margins on the side, where I say the economics of the art world also study the establishment of sales channels such as auction houses alongside the rise of public institutions So from their perspective, when they wrote this essay, that was one structure of the art market, or one way of looking at the art market. We, I think, are currently kind of wrapped up in that first one. And a lot of it has to do with the way that we fetishize certain things, and I'm going to talk about that more specifically when we get into your first textbooks, the first of the textbooks, this one, Talking Prices. This is number one, if you are looking at this page right here. The economics of the art world also studies this. This is the structure. This is the channels. It's a very, very important thing for you to know. It's important for you to know not only structurally, which definitely had a lot to do with the walkings through of the art world that we did. The New York art world, which is not the art world, it's the New York art world. It's a signifier that's very important because the art world is vast. It encompasses all different kinds of cultural traditions all over the world. New York privileges one kind, and it looks like a white cube, like the one I'm sitting in right now. The other function of the economics of the art world study the economic peculiarities of the art object itself. And this is where I take my interest in bringing in other discursive conversations, because postmodernism brought to the rise discourse and the importance of discourse as it relates to artistic practice. Now, there might be a lot of artists that say that they don't think about discourse when they make artworks. Good for them. I don't believe them. They all come from art schools. They all come from cultural traditions where they need to read a book before they do anything. We all need to read books before we do anything. I mean, hell, there's a book called Wine for Dummies. You can't just go into a wine store and buy a bottle of wine these days. You got to read a book about it. So, discourse is our contemporary peculiarity of the art object. That's where this one's going to come in. Important stuff that we're dealing with. And then the third, one page down, Gertz on the side, value is thus taken to be a relative and culturally specific category of thought particular to the observed subject. We are the ones who define value. And so if textbook number one gives us the structure of that first marginal note, and textbook number two gives us the theoretical underpinning, or what they refer to as the economic peculiarity, what my hope is, at the end of this, we will collectively reach a point where we can challenge ourselves as viewers of art in thinking of these objects in different ways. We have the ability to change the value system that we view artwork in. We have the ability to crack that egg open, as it were, and engage with a wider variety of different value systems. And it's in this new phase that I'm positing that I really do think that not only is it an important conversation to have, but I think it's a very, very salient conversation to have. Now, I'm not saying that I want to toot my own horn or anything like that, but I will say that very few artists, even at the Ivy League schools, even at the most vanguard programs, don't have an understanding of the art world as a value system, as a fractured and multiplicitous value system. This course is fairly uncharted territory. There are books, sure, but I mean, as I'm sure some of you know by ordering this textbook, this is a fairly new book. This is a fairly new conversation. I mean, Merritt's conversation in Alaska at the TED Talk that you watched just before seeing this lecture was fairly recent. The list of the most expensive paintings is fairly recent. It's only been in the last few years that conversations about the breadth and expense of the art market, or rather the accrued monetary value that is defined by the commodity phase of certain art objects, is only of new importance. When Picasso and Braque were working quietly in their studio in Paris in, let's just say 1912, when they were inventing collage, nobody cared how expensive it was going to be. Nobody even thought about that. Do you think that Gertrude Stein and her brother, when they moved to Paris at the turn of the century and they began to buy works of avant-garde artists, that they were billionaires? They weren't. They just weren't. They were able to purchase these works of art because it was not outside of the realm of possibility. And as we look at the art world that is defined by Veltius's text talking prices, we're going to see that there's a few different kinds of art worlds, and the kind that Moran focuses on is the 1%. And I hate to critique economic structures using a term of economic structure, but it's just an easy term to throw out. All of you understand what I mean. I could say elitism there, but I like using buzzwords. You know, I'm hip, whatever that means. And so, this is a very important conversation, and it's filled with lots of really important critical theorists, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. Before we move on to talking about just like the brass tacks of this course, I do want to close our conversation very quickly with a comment by Marx and then a comment by Lukács. So Marx, there it is. Like a little star right next to it. Social hieroglyph. Value, therefore, does not stalk about with a label describing what it is. It is value, rather, that converts every product into a social hieroglyph. And that goes back to Hegel's comment, where it's in the history of the thing that we get its most sensitive perspective of value. I think that both of those men are preoccupied with history, and given that our conversation is going to be about contemporary practice, and that the whole conversation about fine art has really entirely changed. I mean, the majority of the art market, both in the works that were shown, the works that were displayed, the works that achieved high price tags, were all old works, all antiquated works. Now we're in the day and age where the contemporary world is much more privileged. Lukács on the next page, as is argued by the corners, here Lukács argued the bourgeois isolated discrete aspects and moments from the complex and changing reality of late capitalism and attributed them to a thing-like status. So a certain portion of our conversation is going to be dealing with the thing. We're going to be talking about things, everybody. Things accrue value. And it's the thing that I am really super interested in. The thing, or rather the way that I'm talking about things and the way that we're going to be dealing with things comes from this book, The Social Life of Things. This book is awesome. If you get into this conversation and you just want to read some really dorky text about commodification practices, cultural iconography, that's the book for you. Arjan Apadura, the editor of the text, is so smart and so spot on with his inclusion of certain text. I've included 2 of the texts here on our reading list. If they pique your interest, I really strongly recommend reading the introduction. Some of my later lectures in this course are going to be pulled from the introduction, specifically my conversation about tournaments of value, but it's just perfect. It's, oh man, it's so good. Well, what that book deals with is, and I've referenced it a few times, is this idea of a commodity phase. And a commodity is a very specific thing. And when you talk to someone who is, say, a lawyer, they're going to tell you a very specific, very minute answer. A commodity is a fudgeable thing, i.e. it's a thing that can be exchanged for money. It's a thing that it's a thing you can pay for. No. According to Apadura and all the social and critical theorists that he puts in that text, and several of the people that we're going to be reading, a commodity is much bigger than that. A commodity is not a good, and this is all stuff we're going to hash out more specifically later on. A good is like a service. That's what you exchange money for. A commodity is merely a part of a thing's existence. It's a thing's life. At some point, this pen in my hand was bought by someone. It was also sold by someone, therefore it was in its commodity phase. That commodity phase is defined by a huge amount of cultural signifiers that we're going to be looking at. And as they say on page 304, since commodities function by their being consumed, since what is consumed is the total system of commodities, modern society is constituted in an ongoing and, though veiled, potlatch. And we'll talk about potlatch more specifically as it relates to the theorist Baudrillard, but you're not going to read his conversation on potlatch. You're going to read his conversation on the ecstasy of information, which is also a beautiful text. So we're going to be looking at that kind of stuff. How these things operate, how they flow through space. And so art retains its traditional value as a privileged site of cultural critique. That's the value of art. It's a privileged site of cultural critique. I'm going to pause really quickly, and then I'm just going to really quickly run through the assignments and also our reading schedule. All right, I'm going to wrap this up fairly quickly. Approaches to critical theory, defining value in critical theory. Yes, it says critical theory there twice. My title for this course is the latter half of that line, defining value in critical theory. But because all of you have come to understand the idea that we're going to be dealing with, look at that, Mylar. I'm in an art space. It's crazy. Remember our first class that was like surrounded it was in a science lab? So our course, all of you I hope have read through this, so I'm not going to spend that much time going through it. I neglected to bring one of our texts down here, the Market book, but we're going to be dealing with that book pretty specifically, but it's actually one of the books that you're going to be going through a little bit more on your own. Now, when I say that, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll just start. So the required text, I've already told you, talking prices is going to be used in the first half of our course to describe the movings of the art world, the vast art world. I was not surprised that a few of you in your conversation of our winter intensive talked about the limits of the New York art world and the specificity of the New York art world. That's something that I view as problematic as well, and it's something that I'm very interested in expanding. I think it's far too limiting to have a conversation that revolves entirely around white cube galleries in one neighborhood of one city in one country in the entire world. And so I am going to do my best to showcase things that exist in other places. I will say that the limit there has to do more with resource than anything. The higher budget the gallery, the better a digital presence it has. And so if I want to show you an exhibition review or works of art online, it's going to be tough to show you things that exist in, say, a roadside art gallery outside of Vienna. They might not have a website. But that said, I am going to try really hard to bring this stuff out, as it were. So, talking prices, he is an anthropologist and economic theorist, as the book will say, but also if you read, there's a short bio of him in the Contemporary Art 1989 to present, because one of the things you're going to be reading fairly soon, actually this week, is written by him in that text. So there's that. The second is the market. Now, for those of you who have not encountered this series of texts from Whitechapel Gallery in London, it's called Documents of Contemporary Art. I'm very pleased to introduce you to it. It is a great resource. They pull together short snippets of sections that relate to all manner of different things. There's one that's specific to painting, for those of you who are painters. I don't think they have one that's specific to photography yet, but I would imagine that is in the pipeline. They have one on failure, one on the market, obviously. There's lots out there. So, and they're easy reads. So, and then the third assigned text is The Anti-Aesthetic by Hal Foster. The question has already come up about the volume, which volume you need to be purchasing, and I can say that this is such a seminal text that I doubt there's any difference between the 1998 version and the latter version, which I believe Melissa was referencing as a 2004 version, early 2000s. Oh my god, I don't know why I said that word. Regardless, I don't really like irregardless. I know it's a real word, it's been around for 200 years, it just sounds redundant. So, side note, footnote, there are going to be a few things pulled from previous texts that you have. I've listed here Art and Theory, 1900 to 2000. I also have Contemporary Art, 1989 to present. That said, there is also a reading that comes from the Feminism Art book that I assigned for last semester. There's just one reading in there, which I hope none of you sold back that book. If you did, you find someone else in the class that can scan you the reading. But also in digital relay, because there's several things that we're going to be going through that are not in any of these books. So we're going to start off by going to assignments. Indices of value. I thought that this was a funny way to begin our conversation about value. It seems like an incredibly laborious task, but I give you a hint. So I want you to go to Art and Theory, and I want you to find the several mentions of the term value in that book. And then I want you to present your findings in some fashion to me. So you're going to be turning in something. Obviously it has to be formatted in such a way that it can be sent to me digitally, unless of course you want to send it through the mail, in which case give me a heads up and I'll be very excited about getting a piece of mail from you, and you can send that directly to Flux Factory, care of me. All the information about where Flux Factory is has been relayed to you before, but it's also on the website. So, I give you a few examples. It can be a short paper, it can be even an Excel spreadsheet, it can be a drawing, it can be a portrait, it can be anything you want, but it just has to encompass all of the different ways that the term value shows up in that text. The next section is art world value. And in this one, you are to select a reading from the market, one of the assigned texts, and you are to discuss it in relation to the term value. Now, that said, I'm not anticipating that you're going to read the entire book. That's ridiculous. And, all of you have been through some intensive level of schooling, and so I'm sure that you've developed your ability to skim read things and figure out what you find interesting. That said, the market is a very quick read, and so, well, you'll be able to find something that you can write 400 words, which is very brief, in that book. So good luck with that one. The last is a 1,200 word essay where I want you to go through the anti-aesthetic and find one of the things in that book that relates to your practice. What in that text it draws you in. It can be an essay that we read that's from our reading list. It can be one of the essays that I did not assign for this course. The good thing about that text is it's a very broad swath of critical discourse around postmodern thought. I imagine that a lot of you will find points of contention with the author, but also points of agreement. So that in there lies the challenge. What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? And I say in there, it's in those right there in those spaces your critical engagement with the essay can be launched. I think that this is going to be a really interesting thing for you all to write. You're going to have to read this essay probably a few times. And you might need to do a small amount of research into who the person was that wrote it and why they wrote it and where they were in their life when they wrote it, X, Y, Z. However you decide to go about it, it's up to you. It's got to be a 1,200 word written thing, and it's due at the very end of our term. So, those are the 3 major assignments. It's going to be fun. So we go back here. Scroll down. Now, board meeting, right here. This is the platform for what I'm referring to as show and tell. So, I'm in New York. Some of you are in Portland. Some of you are in Texas. Some of you are in Missouri, Colorado, Michigan. You're all over the place. This is where we as a class are going to collectively be looking at art practice and the way that art is presented in your region or in the world that you tap into through the internet or through friends or through magazines or what. And what I want you to do is bring something to this board meeting every week. And that's going to be relative to these readings. So you're going to do these readings. A lot of you there on the discussion boards, there's already been comments about the untitled reading from Contemporary Art 1989 to present. And you can bring up those issues or something that you find that might relate to it. I think that there is a very histrionic rhetoric that is employed by the 2 artists that authored that text, and if that conjures up the idea of, I don't know, Cobra from G.I. Joe, some evil overlord who's set out to crush personal freedoms. I just came up with that this very moment. It can be that far-fetched, but I want you to present that information and bracket it with just a very few amount of words saying, this is why I chose this. The reason I'm asking you to do this every week is because I want this to be quick. I don't want you to put so much energy and effort. I want you to spend more of that time doing these readings. I'm assigning you a lot of literature. I want you to get through it all. It's very important that you get through it all. It's very important that as we move forward in our time together in this program, and as you move on to your thesis, that I know you have a handle on these readings. So focus on getting the readings done. Listen to me blabble on every once in a while. And when the thought strikes you, like, have a little notepad next to you and just jot down, like, whoa, that woman's insane. Like, I want to look up crazy authors, or like, that man is a total moron, and I'm going to look up a dunce, or I'm going to put like the Three Stooges. You know, it can be whatever you want. Just, I want it to be part of the conversation. I actually do want it to be a little bit erring on the fun side, because a lot of the things we're talking about, people don't see as having a lot of levity to them. And so enjoy your contributions, because I want all of us to enjoy contributions. Obviously, all of that said, I would like you to also bring in some conversations about the art practice in your world. You know, as we're reading Talking Prices, and they're talking about this kind of hegemonic art world that exists. How is that different from the art world that you're encountering? You know, I've had lots of very awesome conversations with Blair about the distance between the art world that she encounters in San Antonio, the art world that she encounters in Portland, the art world that we all collectively encountered in New York. And it's very interesting for me to hear that, but I can't convey that with the same amount of honesty as you can. And so if you're reading something about, say, you know, how this gallery prices things, and then you go to a show in your local district and it operates completely differently, bring that up. Tell us about that. That's what's going to be interesting about this course, is that we are collectively going to be looking at the structure of the art market. Because if the art market is, as the corners set it up, is a marker of a historical moment, then I want all of us to have an understanding of what that historical moment is, where we all collectively live. I don't just want this to be me translating like these weirdo spaces in New York to you. That's not going to be beneficial to you. It's going to be more beneficial to all of us if we have this very critical but also broad understanding of what an art market is. See? Discussion board. This is super casual. This is a place for questions. This is a place for thoughts on the reading that might not be relative to what you bring to our show and tell. This can be an unpacking, it can be a venting, it can be, I'm not being very structured with the discussion board this term. Last term, it was very regimented. I wanted to have a set amount of words. I don't think I had a set amount of words, but I wanted to make sure that every week there was something there. That's not the case with this course. I do assume that every week something is going to come up on the board meeting, but if you, in your notebook, you have all these other like angsty things or productive things, hopefully productive things, to say, put those on the discussion board, because it's going to be really beneficial for everybody. Oops. Week 1, hello. Week 2, show and tell. This is me showing you and telling you. We talked a little bit about the first reading. I deliberately assigned the second reading to be a little contrarian and a little contentious, specifically because when talking to artists, specifically international artists, and I don't mean artists that are not from the United States, I mean artists that specifically travel around the world doing projects, whether it be in a residency like Flux Factory or for a biennial somewhere or whatever. Oftentimes conversations about the art market err on this kind of capitalist threat, this like very It's invasive, it's overbearing, it's scary, XYZ. And so I wanted you to have that understanding, and I'm happy that people have already began to fight back on that in our discussion boards, and I look forward to the possibility of a show and tell. I understand at this point it might be a little too late. I haven't quite defined those projects for you, so really with this second week, this Friday is the first week that I'm going to really be looking for something to show up on that board meeting, so know that. Week 3, you do not have a show and tell due when we have big assignments due. That's a very important thing that I forgot to say. So the way that this reading schedule is structured, this is what you have to do for that week. This next to it. So that's your assignment. And so for week 2, you have a show and tell. For week 3, you have project 1 due. So don't fret on having a show and tell. Obviously, if you want to put something on the board for that week, I'm not going to say no. But if you're focusing on doing your project and maybe something for Peter's class or something for your studio class, don't sweat it. It's only on the weeks where there is actually listed show and tell that I'm assuming, or I'm expecting, not assuming, I'm expecting to see something from you on that board. So I wanted to give a little bit of lag time because I know that, I was under the assumption that you were going to be passed along an assignment of text because I had to turn it into the school earlier, and I didn't realize that didn't happen. So my apologies, that's my error, that has nothing to do with the school. I just didn't quite read things thoroughly enough. And so I deliberately have not assigned any reading from our 3 textbooks until after this week that we are currently in right now. So 2 more things out of contemporary art. These things are conversations about what the art market is specifically. Oops. That's what I meant to do. Draw some random line on the side of the board. Week 3, we get things rolling, and you read the first chapter of Talking Prices, as you can see there. 2 economies of the art world. This is an important thing to understand. In this first week, I'm trying to crack open this misconception about the New York art world being very linear and specific in this ivory tower. And so both the contribution in the market, but also this Terry Smith provincialism problem, I see as being very nice conversation pieces to stir an understanding of a global art market, and not global in the sense of global biennales or biennials or triennials or quadrennials, whatever they're called, but actually specifically a market that exists in a variety of different cultural traditions, not just the Western one. So then we have a show and tell, a continuation of a conversation about the art market and the specificity of that art market, and then we end up with by week 6 we are wrapping up our conversation on the art market when your assignment on the market is due, and week 7 is when we kind of switch gears and we go from this very pointed conversation about the art market to a much more broad conversation, or a broader conversation rather, on the workings of the postmodern theoretical world, and specifically how that actually contributes to our understanding of the value of works. Because how something is read in a discursive way is an application of a value system onto that thing. And this is going to become clearer once we get into it. So you'll be reading the introduction to Hal Foster's Anti-Aesthetic, which is a great way to familiarize yourself with the text, obviously, but and then you're going to read The Cultural Biography of Things, Commoditization and Process. So I'm actually going to kind of as we introduce postmodernism, we're going to be going into postmodernism, but then also taking a step back and looking at commoditization, or that period that I'm referring to as the commodity phase. Week 8, I'm giving you an assignment by this guy from this book. Awesome theorist. Like, whoa, this guy made me want to do this. Let me say it, I'll be blunt and say it like that. And then we're also reading Jean Baudrillard. Pierre Bourdieu and Jean Baudrillard are two French thinkers, obviously they're French, with names like that, that are instrumental in our understanding of the art market. Almost everybody that writes on the art market references these two authors. They reference this Pierre Bourdieu book, The Field of Cultural Production, but they reference another essay by Jean Baudrillard. But again, I don't want to focus all of my attention on this conversation about the discourse of commodities, because that's something I'm interested in, but I want to convey to you a broader sense of this. So we're looking at a commodity-specific thing, dealing a little bit with semiotics, and then Jean Baudrillard, who deals very specifically with semiotic systems in a new era. For week 9, we're looking a little bit more at the idea of museums, institutions, and collections. And one of the things comes from this book, Culture and Consumption. Great book, really super easy read. As you'll see with his case study on Louise Froget, curatorial consumer in a modern world. In the market, you're going to be looking at conceptual artist Fred Wilson's statement about mining the museum in me. And I talked to you about Fred Wilson before, and I hope that all of you remember his practice and his project, which was called Mining the Museum. And then you're reading Douglas Crimp's On the Museum's Ruins, which is a text that I've definitely brought up in lecture before, I believe in the summer. I referenced that, but now I want you to read it, because it's really important and is a nice way of tying in a broader understanding of the idea of collecting things as a way of applying a value system to them. Then we're going to look at the idea of a historical perspectives, and so we're looking at Jürgen Habermas's Modernity, an Incomplete Project, which is pretty much just the seminal text on postmodernism. It's in the anti-aesthetic. And then there's going to be a PDF of Patrick Geary's Sacred Commodities, the Circulation of Medieval Relics. So not only are we looking at art from around the world, we're looking at art from throughout history. And I want you to understand the idea of the historicization process, as it relates, sorry, someone's stuck in some snow out there, and it sounds insane. And so we're looking specifically at the commodity system that developed around the exchange of medieval religious relics, i.e. parts of saints, so human bodies. This is something that has actually come up fairly recently, so just something to think about. And then week 11, I thought it would be a nice way to kind of overlap the previous semester's conversation on positionality, a word that does exist, and the discourse on consumerism and consumption and commodity. And so Hot Potatoes, Art and Politics, and by Lucy Lepard, and Edward Said's Opponents, Audiences, Constituencies, and Community. A great text. It's dealing with like the political value of art. What is political value? How do we define it? And this is going to rely very heavily on the understanding of positionality as you all have it. And I can say assuredly that all of you have a really nice understanding of the positional, which is the other way that I say that word, Mr. Smith. And then for week 12, we're reading Sculpture in the Expanded Field, and Michael Asher, a statement that he made. And so this is really about focusing on art practice and art production and how we can crack that open. So, again, if a piece of literature is not found in one of the 3 assigned texts for this course or in previous texts, it will be here in a PDF form, as the corner value is. So I'm scanning those and or finding files that already exist in the ether of the internet, and putting them there for you to download. Don't tell anybody I'm doing that. I don't know if that's legal, but whatever. Radical value, man. So on that note, I'm going to let all of you go. I'm really looking forward to show and tell. I'm really looking forward to having a much more free-flowing conversation and an exchange of ideas, and I want to give you that platform to crack open, and I've said that term multiple times, cracking things, to really get at what you think of as valuable. And obviously I'm saying that now, but in 12 weeks that's going to be a very different thing for me to say to you. So on that note, I don't know, see ya.